After winning the 250 class in the 6-hour production race in October, Morris competed in 6 races on a Grand Prix class bike, winning 5, second place in the other, and set 2 new lap records. With that sort of ability, he's a good chance to win this year's Australian 250 Grand Prix title, and then progress onto the international circuit, ultimately to the 500cc class, in which Wayne Gardner is the world champion.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'll try and get a few starts in the 250s, and if I can progress to the 500s, that'll be the way to go, because that's where the top riders are, and that's where the money is, I think.
Is there anything that'll stop you from racing?
No, nothing at all, I don't think. I've got my family behind me and the wife behind me, and money's the thing. That's the thing. Sponsors are the hard things to find.
So how long? What's the outlook? A year or 2, hopefully, to be on the world circuit?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that I could be world champion before I'm 30, so that only gives me 4 years, so I've got to get into it. So within the next 2 years.
Researcher Dr. David Sutherland disclosed the needle exchange program during an inspection tour of the hospital's AIDS unit by Corrective Services Minister John Ackister. Dr. Sutherland says the exchange of needles will supplement existing sales by Newcastle pharmacies, who are distributing up to 1,000 needles a week. He says the exchange will ensure a clean supply for drug users and solve a growing problem of discarded needles. The hospital will participate in the program directly, but another outlet will be opened in an inner-city retailing area with the cooperation of police and local shopkeepers. Corrective Services Minister John Ackister says Dr. Sutherland is a key advisor on AIDS, but a needle exchange program is not viable in the prison system, where even the planned introduction of condoms is still being debated.
One of a number of options available to us which will reduce the risk of AIDS being transmitted between prisoners. Shared needles is also a high-risk area within jails, but we couldn't put needles in the jail. 2 grounds. Firstly, that it would be tacit approval by me of the use of illicit drugs in jails, and I can't do that. But secondly, no prisoner would take such a needle if it was offered to him, because that would identify him as a drug user, and our security people would, of course, be writing on him and deal with him.
Does that mean then that you will expect...
Hello again from Australia, and welcome to some of the most beautiful countryside it's been our pleasure to stumble across while we've been here. Now, this is the Hunter Valley, about an hour's drive from Newcastle, and I suppose this is the equivalent of the Dales back home. It reminds us very much of Tynedale, Teesdale, and of course the Yorkshire Dales. There's a lot of farming goes on around here, but one great difference between this Hunter Valley and the Dales back home is that here they grow grapes. Now, this is a vineyard, or as they call it in Australia, a winery. Sounds like a complaint, doesn't it? Anyway, it's alleged that here they make the finest wine in the southern hemisphere. The Hunter Valley is 120 miles long by about 60 miles wide. There's lots of space for the 500,000 population. It's the main power generation area for New South Wales, coal-fired thanks to the largest open-cast mines in Australia. There's plenty of industry about, but the valley is making its name these days for the excellence of its wine. Now, we wondered who we could ask to cover this story, and who cropped up? Peter Holland.
This is Australia's oldest vineyard, the Wyndham Estate, established 40 years after the first settlers came. Australia is the only continent without any naturally occurring vines. They're all from original European imports. But today, 160 years on, it's big business.
In that area.
Although most of it is now mechanised, the industry does need a little helping hand. In this instance, all the way from County Durham, as Frosty found out.
Yes, we've met 2 grape pickers who are on a working holiday from the Barnard Castle area, Helen Bellis and Caroline Robinson. Now, we didn't even know they were here until we arrived, so we're taking this opportunity for a quick chat. Can I just interrupt your work, Caroline?
Yes,
are you enjoying life out here?
Yes, I love it out here. It's really good. Having a great time.
What about the life of a grape picker? Is it hard work?
Yes, it is fairly hard work. We rise at about 5 in the morning and we finish about 12 o'clock.
Midday?
Midday, so we have all afternoon off. That's a good thing about it.
Soak up the sunshine?
Yes, and go swimming.
Your nose is peeling?
Yes, I know.
It's better than shivering. Better than shivering back home.
Oh yes, it is. A lot better. A lot warmer.
Helen, at home you were a hairdresser. This is a complete change, isn't it?
Yes, I just came out here for a holiday, and we weren't really planning on working, but we just thought while we're here we'd do a bit of fruit picking, just see what it was like.
Is it well paid?
We get paid by the bucket, and on average we pick about 70 buckets a day.
So how much can you come out with for a working week? In pounds?
In pounds? About £100 a week.
£100 a week? And you get accommodation free as well?
Yes.
Yes, up here we do.
It's not a bad one.
Australians drink twice as much wine per head of population as we do in England. In this winery, 10,000 tonnes of grapes are crushed each year. 25% of the produce is exported to 21 countries, including Britain and France.
The fact is that here in the Hunter Valley we have so much sunshine that our vines can make lots of sugar. And that's important when making wine because it's the sugar that gives the grapes their flavour, and then it's the winemaker's task to get that flavour out of the fruit and into the wine he's making. And that comes about, Peter, as a result of the sunshine that we have here in Australia, which gives us constant vintage year after year. Peter, we've only been growing wine here for 160 years. The French and the German have been doing it for maybe 2,000 years. So we've needed to establish our credentials. And it's only of recent 10 or 15 years that table wine in your country has begun to create the impact that we believe is its due. Oh, Peter, I'd like to offer you something very special.
What is this?
Tea! You English love tea, don't you?
It's about time you drank something non-alcoholic on this trip. Anyway, I brought something from home too. May I present you with this, sir? It's our local vintage, 1987 vintage. It was grown on the west side of the allotment, and it's called, you must repeat this, Journey into Space.
Journey into Space.
No, Space.
Space. Thank you very much.
You sound as though you've drunk some already. That will do.
Absolutely. Why don't you stick to this? You send us the beer and we'll send you the wine.
You're on. And what could be better with a glass of chilled Hunter Valley wine than a fresh oyster or two? Or three, or four, or maybe even more. In case the boss is watching, I hope he doesn't get the wrong idea about my expenses, because oysters out here don't cost the earth. In fact, 1 dozen oysters grown at Moffat's Oyster Farm, just north of Newcastle, cost only £3.50. Yes, for a dozen. This is the biggest oyster farming complex in Australia. Each year they grow and sell 2.5 million of them. That's virtually a seaful by our standards, but a mere drop in the ocean in Australia. And they've already been sampled in the northeast of England. Last year, the Moffat family sent out 500 dozen of their finest for the grand bicentenary dinner at Newcastle Civic Centre. Before I took in, I should explain that this sweet little oyster's life began 4 years ago. Seems a pity to eat it, doesn't it? They start their lives between January and March when tarred frames are planted in the spawning grounds. Those white specks are actually baby oysters. After a year, the frames are moved to allow more space for the shells to grow. 12 months later, they're moved again to allow more growth. Then it's happy 4th birthday and harvest time. The adult oysters are knocked from their frames and graded. An experienced eye separates the platters, the bottlers, and the spats according to size. Next, they're given a long drink to remove any impurities. By opening and closing, each one can flush 5 to 6 gallons of water a day through its system. Then comes the somewhat skilled operation of opening the shells. It's all done by hand. They don't just grow oysters here. There's a barn of a restaurant catering for tourists. Some arrive by boat. They can place their orders over the radio.
Moffat's Oyster Barn, this is Marlon too. We're on our way up to the oyster barn. There's 14 aboard, and we'd like to book a table for about 12:30.
And now the moment I've been waiting for, because I've been joined by the company's marketing director, Lloyd Moffat. Lloyd, do I let these just slide down, or do I chew them?
Oh, you must chew them to get the full flavour. Aren't they the best you've ever had in the world? They're delicious.
Where does this come from then, about letting them slide down? Well, surely you lose the flavour, don't you?
Well, of course, that's you must chew them, because otherwise you just really get the salty water flavour. Because as you know, they
they drink lots and lots of water per day, so they're in the shell. When you open them, of course, it's the salt water, so you have to chew them.
Do you have a lot of affection for these little things? You must do.
Oh, yes. Well, after watching them growing for 4 years, you certainly care about them. You know. They're very delicate food. Oysters are probably one of the most delicate foods of seafood.
Now, we regard them as a delicacy because they cost so much. Are they a delicacy in Australia, or are they like eating fish and chips at home?
Oh, no, they're still a delicacy here.
Now, the people of Newcastle dined out on your oysters, and you brought them from this spot here to Newcastle, English Newcastle Civic Centre. Was that much of a trouble for you?
The idea was fantastic until we got there and realised that, of course, you eat your oysters straight away. You know, the European oysters opened and eaten straight away, where these are quite famous for their condition of holding them for up to 10 days, 2 weeks in the right condition.
And one more question. Oysters have a reputation for being an aphrodisiac. Could you comment on that for me at all?
Oh, not without getting myself into trouble, but still single and 41, and so I don't know whether that means that I haven't found the right girl, or I'll leave that up to you.
Right, well, we don't want these to get warm, do we? So please join me in a squeeze of lemon and straight down in one. Well, this really is the high life, isn't it? And from the high life at Moffat's Oyster Farm, Peter Holland's got a story about a high life which is completely different. Get up.
In this leafy suburb on the outskirts of Newcastle, where the temperature is hovering around 30 degrees Celsius, there's a man from Teesside packing clothing to protect himself from temperatures about 30 degrees below freezing. Austin Brooks is the leader of the Australian bicentennial Everest expedition. He's leaving for Tibet next week in a bid to conquer the world's highest mountain from the north side. He was born in Middlesbrough and lived in Redcar and Stockton before emigrating 25 years ago. Now aged 50, he's one of Australia's leading mountaineers. He's a former college vice principal and lives in Wallsend in Newcastle, where he's been doing casual work to raise £2,000 towards the cost of the expedition. Austin, whose parents still live in Stockton-on-Tees, has climbed mountains all over the world, from South America to Lapland. He was the first man to conquer the Mulamenking Peak in Tibet in 1981, and 4 years later attempted Everest and got 2/3 of the way up before being beaten by avalanches.
It was a particularly bad season that year. In 1985, the Japanese lost climbers and the Indians lost climbers, and we were pretty lucky not to lose a couple of ours who were buried in an avalanche. We did have one guy who lost his fingers with frostbite. It was just a terribly bad season, which it never stopped snowing. I don't think we had more than 2 fine days, consecutive days, the whole time we were there.
Well, what motivates a man of 50 to want to risk all again?
A good question. I would suggest that I suffer from prolonged adolescence. But it's a particularly grievous case in this instance. Most people get over it before they're 50.
You know, I've just been doing my sums. £100 a week. I reckon if I stick at this for a while longer, I'll just about afford my airfare home. So I'll see you in £100 a week. December. Actually, we'll be back tomorrow night with a sporting flavour for the weekend. I certainly won't make a grave figure. See you tomorrow. Good night.
More than 500 miners have been off work this week over different disputes at Warkworth and BP's northern operations. The mine owners have adopted similar tactics to try and bring them into line. They've lodged applications with the Coal Industry Tribunal to change working conditions. The move has unified the miners, who claim it flies in the face of industry negotiations, preempting the outcome of discussions taking place on a national level. 2 days ago, the Coal Industry Tribunal heard BP's application. Next Tuesday, Warkworth's will be considered. In the meantime, the tribunal has recommended that the miners return to work. Today, they voted unanimously to ignore that directive. Organisers say the miners are heading for a big blue with the owners. They say the attitude of management to date has justified a 48-hour stoppage going ahead on Monday and Tuesday of next week. They've also called for a strong show of support at next week's meeting before the tribunal.
They also turned around and said in the authority that as far as they were concerned, they needed this bonus reductions and they needed a 9-day fortnight to be able to get it to work, and they needed to put on another 23 people.
Declined to comment.
That was at the first one where Cram handed down the decision.
That all coal owners have tied themselves to those applications. Their representative indicated that clearly before the tribunal on Wednesday. So we haven't got a dispute with BP and Warkworth anymore, we've got a dispute with all of them.
So you're out indefinitely?
At this stage, yes.
And the baby were found by police at a caravan park at Dimboola in the midwest of Victoria following a tip-off from a local. Hospital staff say the incident should not cause panic among parents with babies at the hospital. According to Director of Nursing Matron Shirley Moxie, the infant was taken out through a fire door which only opens from the inside.
The fire escape doorway is only able to be opened from the inside and not from the outside, so there isn't any access from the outside directly into the nursery.
Other security features at the hospital prevent access by unauthorised people. Police have since released the couple, while community services organisations in New South Wales and Victoria decide custody of the infant.
Sergeant Anforth handed in his gun, badge and handcuffs today, marking the start of his retirement. After 31 years with the force, Inspector Ted Jerd joined a group of colleagues to bid him farewell. Back in the 1950s, Sergeant Anforth started judo lessons at the Newcastle, Maitland and Cessnock Police Boys Clubs and initiated the driver training range at Adamstown for students. Later, in December 1977, he founded the Newcastle Police Rescue Squad. His memories of his work in that area are vivid.
We're talking about rescues. I think children would probably be the ones that would stand out. We had 5 in 1 week of very serious accidents of children under 2 years of age that were fatalities within motor vehicles, and of course the other one, aircraft accident in the Scone area, where we've got a young 15-year-old lass. We found the aircraft after 24-hour searching, and she was still alive with multiple fractures and that type of thing, and she's going quite strongly now, and it was a major exercise in itself. But there's many in different areas that you can touch on.
How do you feel about actually retiring now?
Well, mixed feelings, but however, I'm looking forward to it. I've treated the police force as a hobby rather than a job, and I think most of the police that we find around today have done that, and that's why they're as they are. I've liked what I've been doing, and time's caught up, it's time to go.
All right, that's fine, lovely. Thanks very much. Great.
Traffic bottlenecks are a frustrating part of life on Hannell Street, caused by oil companies moving rolling stock from their fuel terminals at Wickham and Tyers Hill. Lengthy talks between oil companies and Newcastle Council have led Esso Australia to submit a development application to relocate its bulk storage terminal at Kooragang Island. Mobil Oil has agreed to terminate its siding by March, leaving only Ampol with a lease on its rail siding until 1990. However, Lord Mayor John McNaughton says talks are underway to overcome this final hurdle of a complex problem.
We pride ourselves on being a 20-minute city. You can get it from anywhere in the city to anywhere else you want to go in the city in 20 minutes, and one of our major arteries is the industrial highway. Well, if you get a 10 to 20-minute break on that, it means that everybody's schedule's out of place, and it's not satisfactory.
Meanwhile, in other important council news, Newcastle upon Tyne in England is about to enter a far-reaching exchange program with its most recent sister city, Newcastle. City Council officials have been negotiating since last year to launch the exchange program, which will involve the movement of skilled personnel in council, university and schools. The Lord Mayor said the cities have far more in common than just a name.
The thing that impressed me so much over there was their small, high-tech industrial parks that they were preparing, not only what they were doing, but how they were doing it. And there's a great deal for us to learn, and it's an initiative that the City Council can take. I think that's the important point. We can take this initiative, we can get the ideas moving, and we can get the benefits for this region.
Are there other specific...
Concern for the past and present management of Blackbuck Reserve was raised late last year, when it was discovered that the 180-hectare site, sheltering an array of caged animals, needed urgent attention. A report undertaken by Bruce Mackenzie and Associates was presented to the Newcastle City Council, outlining recommendations for the reserve's future development, highlighting the need for an overall management plan. In November last year, Council called for a brief to be prepared. That brief was adopted last night. A sunset committee consisting of 3 aldermen, representatives from Council's Community, Engineering and Planning Services, as well as representatives from the Blackbuck Reserve Committee, were appointed to review the progress of the management plan. The brief outlined the need to control traffic access, inspect animal enclosures, provide for additional picnic and barbecue facilities, walking trails and parking areas, as well as the immediate need to review all existing reports carried out on the reserve. Council hopes a new plan will be introduced after a detailed study by an appointed consultant is complete. Meanwhile, a proposed management plan for the Glenrock State Recreation Area was also under the spotlight. According to Alderman Saunders, the National Parks and Wildlife Service is unable to implement such a scheme until all the land set aside at Glenrock is gazetted. Despite a draft plan by Council last year, submitted to the Hunter District Water Board, no further action has been carried out. Last night, Council voted to lobby the state government, with the help of local MPs, the Water Board, the Wildlife Service and the Lake Macquarie City Council, to introduce a management plan immediately.
Items 1, 2 and 5 be adopted.
And demonstrate clearly what the strength
The extended strike follows the national stoppage called on Friday in protest against the actions of 2 Hunter Valley companies. Warkworth and BP's Northern Operations are trying to introduce longer working hours and new production schedules through the Coal Industry Tribunal. The mining unions say the move goes against negotiations taking place on the national front and that owners were backing it as a test case. Yesterday, busloads of miners attended the hearing of Warkworth's application before the tribunal in Sydney. The national strike ended at midnight, with the exception of Warkworth and Howick mines. A decision by the Coal Industry Tribunal is expected to be handed down sometime this morning. Meanwhile, local delegates will meet at the Cardiff Workers Club at 10 a.m.
And it's time that we got stuck in.
Yesterday, 2 officers were charged with assaulting a prisoner in his cell last Friday. Today, a meeting of 80 officers was told another 2 warders had been summoned to appear in Maitland Court this Friday to face similar charges. The prison officers voted to go on an immediate 24-hour strike. They also filled in resignation forms, which they plan to tender on Friday after the court hearings.
we believe that there is a conspiracy by prisoners within Maitland Jail to have discipline and good order that is now maintained at Maitland Jail broke down to something that to where they can run the jail. That is, the prisoners run the jail.
Police from Maitland are now on duty at the jail. The Department of Corrective Services says a special response team is also on standby in the Maitland area. Meanwhile, prison officers plan to meet again tomorrow morning.
Newcastle public servants have voted overwhelmingly for an end to the two-tier wage